This is our April 1st. I keep saying March. I'm having trouble switching months. This is our April 1st Wednesday lesson in history. And as you can see up here, it's lesson 57. And I've gone ahead and wrote your title on the board, The Holocaust Up Close. So yesterday we looked at it from a distance, and today we're going to be looking at it up close with how it personally impacted some people's lives. The dates are 1933 to 1945. To study the Holocaust up close and personal, I'm going to introduce you to 4 individual victims of Adolf Hitler's regime. Each person was subjected to the appalling conditions of a Nazi prison camp. 2 were Jewish, 2 were not. 2 survived, 2 did not. The lives we will examine from the youngest to the oldest during the Holocaust are Anne Frank, Gerda Weizmann Klein, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and Corrie ten Boom. At the time of my writing, one of these 4 individuals is still living and continues to share her remarkable story of liberation. Anne Frank. 13-year-old Anne Frank aspired to be a journalist and hoped that the world would remember her. Unknown to her, these dreams would come true. You see, Anne Frank, a young Jewish girl, kept a 2-year diary while she and her family were hiding from the Nazis. From the salvaged pages of her diary, Anne Frank gives the Holocaust a personal name with real feelings. Class photos of Anne Frank give the Holocaust a face, a smiling face, that is, of an ordinary teenage schoolgirl with jet black hair. As the diary reveals, Anne's family moved from Germany to the Netherlands in 1933 to escape Nazi aggression. For several years, Anne's father, Otto Frank, was prosperous in the city of Amsterdam. However, when German forces came to occupy the Netherlands in 1942, persecution of the Jews followed. As an example of economic persecution, Otto Frank was forced to sign over his company to a non-Jewish partner. That was just the beginning of much worse persecution. When Otto's oldest daughter, Margot, was given notice to report to a work camp, the family opted to retreat. The Franks' first idea of retreat was to flee to the United States or Cuba, but visas were too hard to come by after the United States entered World War II. Otto's next option was to take his family into hiding. They chose as their makeshift dwelling a few rooms above Otto's business building. A secret sliding bookcase blocked the entrance to these rooms. The Franks left their home disheveled on July 6, 1942, so that it might appear to the Nazis that they fled the country in a hurry. In reality, the Franks walked only a few blocks away from their home into their hiding place with layers of clothes upon their backs. They dared not walk the streets with a suitcase. The Franks did not know how long their concealment would last or just how many others would join them. In a short time, their attic space became home to 4 more residents. Their only hope of survival was to rely on Otto's work associates for food, supplies, and news about the war. Otto's associates knew that if they were caught aiding and protecting Jews, it would cost them their lives. They did it anyway. For 2 years, Otto's work associates smuggled groceries, birthday gifts, and necessities to the hidden Jews, who could not venture out of their secret place to see the sun or to walk the streets. Anne wrote in a diary throughout her entire confinement in the attic. It is her honest portrayal of fear and patience, hope and faith that has won the world over and made Anne Frank, The Diary of a Young Girl, a best-selling book, play, and film. Like most adolescent girls, she wrote of her private feelings. She shared her struggles with self-image and bouts of jealousy towards her ever-patient older sister, whom everyone insisted she model. Anne wrote of ups and downs with her overbearing mother and reflected often on the patience of her father, who oversaw her education while the family was in seclusion. Tugging at most hearts, Anne included in her diary the exhilaration and the agony of a budding romance with a boy named Peter, a teenager whose family shared the same hiding place. Tragically, Anne was one of the 2 in our lesson who did not survive the Holocaust. After 2 long and fretful years of hiding, the Frank family and their friends were exposed to the authorities on August 4, 1944. No one knows who gave them up. All were arrested. The Frank family and several others who had been in hiding with them were sent to Auschwitz. Two of Otto's work associates, helpers who brought them food and other supplies in hiding, were sent to other prison camps, but both survived. At Auschwitz, Otto was separated from his wife and daughters, and they never saw him again. Anne was 15 when she arrived at Auschwitz and just missed the cutoff for immediate execution. All children under 15 were immediately killed. While at Auschwitz, Anne and Margot were assigned to the infirmary. Their mother smuggled her food to them through a hole in the infirmary wall, hoping to keep her girls strong and alive. This was to have a tragic ending. In October of 1944, Anne and Margot were shipped to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, but their mother was kept behind at Auschwitz and died there of starvation in January of 1945. Anne and Margot stayed together until their final days. In March 1945, a typhus epidemic swept through Bergen-Belsen, killing thousands of prisoners. It is heartbreaking to report that Anne and Margot both contracted the illness and died sometime that month, just weeks before the war ended and Bergen-Belsen was liberated on April 15, 1945. So they died a month before they could have been free. Of the four members of the Frank family, only Otto survived the Holocaust. He made his way back to the secret attic and soon learned that one of the family's helpers had found and gathered up Anne's writings, hoping to return them to Anne after the war. In his daughter's honor, Otto published an edited version of her diary in 1947, the very thing she had hoped for. Despite the tragic outcome of the story, the first edition is an inspiring read. In closing, let me add that I had the opportunity to visit Anne Frank's hiding place in Amsterdam, which is now a museum. All I can say is that I cried all the way through it. Gerda Weizmann Klein. Gerda Weizmann was 15 years old in 1939 when the Nazis invaded Poland. She and her family were Jewish and Polish, a double negative in Hitler's eyes. From the moment the Nazis arrived, all four members of the Weizmann family sensed persecution. Visits to the theater were forbidden, food was rationed, and jobs were taken. Devastating the family, Gerda's older brother Arthur was shipped off to a work camp, never to be seen again by his family. Little by little, life was sucked dry of all normality, and by the spring of 1942, Gerda and her parents were herded into a crowded ghetto with thousands of other Jews. The Weizmanns fought hard to stay together for as long as possible. The day came, however, when Papa was sent away on a train to Auschwitz. Gerda and her mother never saw him again. It's presumed that he died in a gas chamber. A short time later, Gerda and her mother were also separated for the rest of their lives when Gerda was shoved onto a large truck. She was packed tightly against several other young, frightened girls deemed healthy enough to be an asset to the Nazis. One unusual thing about Gerda Weizmann was this. On the warm day she was forced onto the truck that took her away from her mother, she was wearing snow boots. Why? Her father insisted that when they fled their home she wear her boots. Though Gerda protested, her father had the foresight to realize that the extreme times were coming. The boots would save Gerda's life. Gerda was sent to a working concentration camp where thousands were enslaved by the Nazis to manufacture textiles. The work was tedious and difficult, but far better than the alternative. Gerda made friends and put on small plays at night to help pass the time and distract the inmates from their ongoing fight with lice, vermin, and hunger pain. Gerda spent 3 years in various concentration camps. Being relatively young and healthy, she was shuffled to 7 different work camps, never knowing if she would survive the crowded, foodless train ride in between. Like many of the prisoners, she entertained the idea of escape, but she witnessed execution after execution of those who failed and decided against the idea. She also considered taking her own life, but her father, before they were separated, asked her to promise that she would not do that. Gerda honored her father's request and held on to the hope of rescue. Rescue barely came to Gerda Weizmann. You see, weeks before the war ended, the Nazis began to clear out their concentration camps, lest they be caught red-handed committing horrific crimes against humanity. To empty their work camps, they executed thousands or forced them on death marches to the innermost parts of Germany where they might be hidden. Well, remember the boots that Gerda's father made her wear? This is where they saved her life. Gerda was forced to walk 350 miles in the snow from Poland to Germany with little to no food water, or warm clothing. Thousands of men and women forced to do the same thing died from exposure and starvation. Gerda survived, in part because of her boots. By the way, it was the bottom of her boots that Gerda kept hidden pictures of her family. The photos inspired her to survive. In May 1945, Gerda woke up in an abandoned factory with dozens of dead and dying women. The day before, the Nazis' guards had fled. The war was over. Upon hearing the news from a stranger, Gerda wrote the following memory of her liberation, and these are her words. From the window, in the early morning light, I saw a church on a hill. The white flag of peace waved gently from its steeple. My throat tightened with emotion, and my tears fell on the dusty windowsill. I watched how they did not soak into the dust, but remained like round, clear crystals. And that was all I could think of in my great hour of my life. As Gerda staggered out into the daylight, she saw a military man walking towards her. The first thing she said was, "We are Jews." The man paused and said, "So am I." He was an American soldier who had come to liberate the prisoners. The soldier asked Gerda to take him to the other ladies inside the factory. Gerda was taken aback to hear the word ladies. It was a word that seemed not to apply to her or to the other women in this awful situation. When she led this kind soldier to the factory entrance, he held the door open for her. According to Gerda, her humanity was restored in that one lingering moment. For the first time in years, Gerda felt she was being treated as a person rather than an animal. The Red Cross soon arrived at the scene and created an emergency hospital for the newly freed prisoners. Gerda recalls the joy of taking her first bath in 3 years, drinking her first glass of milk in 3 years, and lying in the first clean bed in 3 years. Life would have to start over slowly for Gerda and the other Holocaust victims who managed to survive the mental, emotional, and physical trauma of the concentration camps. By the way, Gerda married that American soldier who rescued her. His name was Kurt Klein. The two eventually made their home in the United States and had 3 children. Kurt Klein passed away in 2002, but Gerda, as of this writing, just turned 90 years old and continues to share her story of liberation. In 1994, Gerda wrote a powerful book of her experience titled All But My Life. I cried all the way through it too. The book was made into an award-winning documentary titled One Survivor Remembers. Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Unlike Gerda Weissmann, Dietrich Bonhoeffer did not survive the Holocaust. He didn't die, however, for being a Jew. On the contrary, Bonhoeffer was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed German Christian. Though he fit the profile of an able-bodied Aryan, he died at the hands of the Nazis for conspiring to assassinate Adolf Hitler. Here is the courageous story. Born in 1906, Dietrich Bonhoeffer enjoyed a privileged childhood in a loving, industrious, musical German family. He pursued the study of theology in 1923. 10 years later, when Hitler gained power, Bonhoeffer was ordained a Lutheran minister. He had no idea what lay ahead in his career, but he gained early fame through numerous publications, including his most influential book titled The Cost of Discipleship. The book warned Christians against cheap grace, which Bonhoeffer described as the preaching of forgiveness without requiring repentance, baptism without church discipline, communion without confession. Cheap grace is grace without discipleship, grace without the cross, grace without Jesus Christ. Though Bonhoeffer had his theological critics, many would find him to be an astute scholar with the tender heart of a shepherd. Well, as mentioned previously, the Nazis took control of everything, including the church. That is, they tried. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was one of many pastors who caught on quickly to Hitler's evil schemes and resisted the takeover. He and many other Christian Germans were appalled at Hitler's persecution of the Jewish people. It was evident that Hitler's hatred of Jews was more than a religious bias because he also oppressed the Jews in Germany who had converted to Christianity. When other pastors began to swear their allegiance to Hitler, Bonhoeffer declined. In fact, he helped found the Confessing Church, which chose not to align itself with Nazi ideology. There was a price to pay for going against the Nazis, but Bonhoeffer followed his own advice from the cost of discipleship and would not stray from his faith. Bonhoeffer and the other members of the Confessing Church were soon on the wanted list of the Third Reich. For a time, Bonhoeffer pretended to join the Nazis so that he might infiltrate the ranks. His actions confused many of his followers, but in the end he believed it was his duty to help plot the death of Hitler. On April 6, 1943, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was arrested for matters not related to an assassination plot. In a peculiar twist of events, he was detained for a minor offense, thus giving him 2 more years to live. Had the death plot against Hitler had been discovered, Bonhoeffer would have faced immediate execution. During this time, Bonhoeffer played the part he knew best, that of being a shepherding pastor. In prison, he gathered inmates for Bible study, led worship, and wrote books and articles. Because he was related to a high-ranking Nazi, Bonhoeffer was given much better treatment than most prisoners and was allowed visits with his parents and fiancée. Yes, while in prison, he was engaged to be married, which indicates that for at least some time he believed he would be set free. But while in prison, he also wrote this of his probable death: "Those who live with Christ die daily to their own will. Christ in us gives us over to death so that he can live within us. Our physical death very truly becomes not the end, but rather the fulfillment of our life with Jesus Christ." Dietrich Bonhoeffer might have survived the Holocaust and married as he had hoped, but just weeks before the war ended, Bonhoeffer was identified as one of several men involved in a plan to assassinate Hitler. There were many failed assassination attempts against Hitler by high-ranking Germans in the military. Bonhoeffer's penalty was execution by hanging. Witnesses claim that the pastor, prophet, spy faced his death sentence courageously. He knelt in earnest prayer just before he died on April 9, 1945. He was 39 years old. Many would label him a martyr for having died at the hands of the Nazis in defense of the Jewish people and the confessing church. Our last person is Corrie ten Boom. The last of our 4 Holocaust victims that I wish you to meet is Corrie ten Boom. A delightful Christian woman, she, like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, stood against the Nazis on behalf of the Jewish people. Unlike Bonhoeffer, she survived and was able to travel the world with her message of faith and forgiveness. Here is her amazing story. Corrie ten Boom was born in the Netherlands. She never married but found great joy in serving others and helping her father with the family business. Her father was a successful watchmaker. In 1940, the Nazis invaded her homeland and imposed food rations on everyone. Corrie's father was a deeply religious man of the Christian faith who cherished the Old Testament as much as the New. Therefore, when oppression of the Jews became commonplace in the Netherlands, he protested. He and his grown children, with whom he shared a home, looked for creative ways to protect their Jewish friends and neighbors. It was a costly choice. Thinking far in advance, the ten Booms hired an expert to remodel Corrie's bedroom on the upper floor of their home. Smuggling bricks and mortar in from the outside, they slowly built a suitable hiding place for the persecuted. It was nestled behind a false wall with a ventilation system and a warning buzzer in the event of a raid. To feed those in hiding, the ten Booms and other members of their church created fake ration cards. It was risky business to hide Jews and break the ration laws. It involved countless heroic individuals whose names we may never know. On February 28, 1944, the ten Booms' secret was shattered. After 2 years of harboring refugees, they were betrayed. The Nazis arrested Corrie's entire family. During the raid on ten Boom's home, at least 6 Jews remained hidden from authorities. To everyone's surprise, the secret hiding place was never discovered. Nonetheless, on suspicion of working in the Dutch underground, the ten Booms were imprisoned. One of Corrie's sisters, her brother, and her nephew were later released, but Corrie, then 52 years old, her sister Betsy, and her father were detained in a local jail as political prisoners. Corrie's elderly father died within 10 days of the arrest. The girls were subjected to solitary confinement and then thrown into filthy, overcrowded cells, not designed for the numbers they held. The stench alone was unbearable. Corrie recounted that one kind German prison guard smuggled a New Testament to her to strengthen her faith behind bars. In time, the ten Boom sisters were shipped by train to Ravensbrück concentration camp in Germany. Corrie recalled that as difficult as the concentration camp was, with all of its deprivations, it was better than the local jail had been. At Ravensbrück, she managed to secretly share her copy of the New Testament with other inmates and found great comfort in doing so. Though Betsy was a woman of great faith, her health did not fare as well as Corrie's during their incarnation. incarceration. She often repeated the phrase, "There is no pit so deep that God's love is not deeper." But the deplorable conditions killed her. Corrie, against all odds, was released from confinement on New Year's Eve in 1944. She believed she was freed because of clerical error and God's sovereign grace. Former inmates about her age were killed at the concentration camp the following week, as they were deemed too old for Nazi labor. The 10 months that Corrie ten Boom spent in a Nazi prison were enough to shape her heart for a lifetime. Out of great compassion, she established homes for Holocaust survivors to help them acclimate back to what was left of their former lives. Corrie ten Boom has been well recognized for her humanitarian efforts. She gave credit for all of it to the Lord, who taught her to forgive her captors. Living to the age of 91, Corrie wrote several books about her life and faith and spoke all over the world. Her story is a bright spot in the otherwise depressing account of the Holocaust.